Well, good morning, everybody. This is a presentation, just a recap of our first week's work here in geography class. And one of the most important themes for the whole class, and this will carry us through to the end of the year, school year, is the use of thematic maps. In every unit, you'll be going over thematic maps. We'll be using thematic maps in some shape when we're analyzing maps. When we get back into the building, we'll definitely be able to use them, physically use them to be able to analyze stuff. But if you see here on the title page, I do have a couple examples of maps. And these maps they're all maps of the world or maps of the United States or Africa in this case, but they all have different purposes. For example, here per capita personal income in 2019, like how much money the population on average makes in these states. And you can tell, for example, that if you want to make some money, you might want to go to New York and these areas in East Coast of California because they tend to make over 60,000. Whereas if people in these areas in white tend not to make as much. So all these have a purpose. These maps are made not just for decoration, but because there's a purpose to it. So in this lesson, you will learn about how to describe a place by its physical human characteristics, and you also learn how to use thematic maps that show this information. So geographers like to use different maps to be able to highlight certain aspects, and we, especially now, if you guys look in this next slide here, look at this map here. This is what do you see, and what's the purpose of this map? And answer this as you fill this out right now on here on the Add Puzzle. What's the map legend used for, and why it may be important to look at a thematic map? So in this map here, this is a map. If you guys ever need to look, always look at the key. It's about Illinois and the confirmed coronavirus cases that were done. And this is from April 27 of 2020, and this is when the state was barely beginning to get an uptick in where we had that. And if you notice, some parts of Illinois and white don't have any of these counties don't have any cases. But if you look at, for example, in Cook County, where we all live here in Cook County, we had about 31,000 cases of COVID-19 back on the 27th of April, and then DuPage and all these counties. And if you notice, the first outbreak of coronavirus really happened here, and also over here that's closer to St. Louis, Missouri, and over here in the Quad Cities. So in urban centers, you tend to kind of have more of that. But this map, if you go onto any Illinois Department of Health page, will still be up there, but it'll be updated with the caseloads now. And what we're seeing right now, and this is today, we're in August 4th, is that there's an uptick of cases over here in the southern part of the state, whereas here it's decreased. But this map gives us an idea of where we would go. If I were to travel in Illinois, I probably would, if I would have traveled down here maybe for a vacation to get away from any possible contagion. But nowadays it's switched around. So the purpose of these maps is to give us information to relay a point. The point of a map is to relay that. So the first type of physical feature map you're going to find are the physical features of physical features in general, not India, but this is an example one. And if you notice, it's always there's different colors, and these colors that tell you how high the land is. So for example, here in green, it's below sea level. So this area tends to flood. And then you have lowlands here from 0 to 1,000 feet in elevation. For our purposes here in Chicago, in the Chicagoland area, we tend to be in this region. Then you have 1,000 to 2,000, so forth and so on. And when you get up here in red, you tend to have some of the really tall areas. This is Himalaya Mountains, which is some of the highest mountains in the world. You have mountains, deserts, valleys, and also tells you as well as bodies of ocean, the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengals, and it gives you an idea of what you have there, and that's what physical features are. The next one is called climate zones. Climate zones is basically a large area of the earth where a particular pattern of weather. And then also tells you, it gives you an idea if it rains or not. So for example, here, arid tends to be a very dry region. If you see here, in Australia, in the middle part of Australia, it tends to be arid. But if you go down over here, marine west coast, you tend to have, and humid subtropical, you tend to have a lot of rain in these areas. Tropical wet, you tend to have a lot of rain, and then tropical wet gives you climates there. So what it basically tells you, if this area here in pink and red, they're always going to be very hot weather. It's always going to be very warm, always humid, all humid and wet and sticky. Semi-arid and arid, it's going to be warm, it's going to be dry. It might get cold, but it's always going to be warm and dry. And then over here, Mediterranean, this in brown always tells you that it tends to be pretty nice weather all year round. You know, 60, 70 degrees. In the winter, maybe about 40 degrees for a low, but it's never going to snow or anything like that. And the Mediterranean West Coast in this area, it tends to be mild weather all along. So the climate zone just telling you what type of weather it is all year round. Here in Chicago, we tend to have humid summers, but then we get very cold winters, and it's a pattern of weather. And what goes hand in hand with that is vegetation zones. You know, the type of weather that we get will determine, in a huge part, what kind of plants and vegetation, grass, plants that we'll have. So you tend to have, they're found in a region. So in this case here, you have a desert. You're not going to have many plants. Desert scrub is like plants that can survive in a very dry environment and absorb a lot of, very little water. And you guys down over here, tropical grasslands, broadleaf, evergreen forest tends to be like very, a lot of trees and so forth and so on. So in this diagram here, you have the different types of um, of vegetation zones. So, for example, you tend to have these tall trees with large leaves, and this area is going to be like the rainforest. You're going to have a ton of trees and thickness and all. And this is going to be where you have a lot of rain, and it's going to be hot. The same thing with tropical grasslands. You're going to have some trees, but you're going to have some vegetation there, and they're adapted to tropical wet and dry climate, desert, dry weather, dry. And then here, you tend to have this in the Mediterranean. It depends based on the elevation, and then temperate grasslands. And then where we live, we would be probably in the mixed forest or the deciduous forest and trees that with broad flat leaves that are shed before winter. So in the fall, this is us. And then as you get colder into the ice caps out there, you tend to have any vegetation. The next map is population density. You tend to have, it's a population density tells us how crowded a place is by people living per mile. So if you look over here, it tells you per mile. This is kilometer, but for the purpose of this class, let's focus on the mile. So always remember that kilometer is going to be shorter than a mile. So we'll use the kilometer here. So in this area in yellow, there's under 2 people per mile. So what it's telling you is that there's not many people that live there. It's very sparse. Sparse means not many people, very little people. As you go over here to this part here, like Wuhan, where the coronavirus, originated from in Wuhan, China, you tend to have over 250 people per square mile. So you have a huge population center. And in these, obviously, these highlight how many people are per city. Wuhan, in this case, had over 4 to 8 million people in there. And in purple and red, tends to tell you that it's a very crowded part of China. China has over 1 billion people, but most of the population we notice is closer to the sea, and is on the eastern part of the continent of the country. And then finally, our last map will be on economic activity. It shows you the land use, how people make a living. So what do they do in this land? What do they do in this land? So basically here, like hunting and gathering, you have some over here in this part. Those tend to be areas where there's not many people living there. It tends to be very isolated areas of the country. Subsistence farming is where you have people who can farm, but farming only for them to provide for their own family. On the other hand, commercial farming is where they produce huge amounts of corn or whatever cash crop for them to sell. And then you have nomadic herding. Again, that's in very isolated areas. You tend not to see that very often. And then commercial fishing is this all in blue. Basically, they're out there fishing in large quantities to be able to sell fish, whatever fish they can. Forestry refers to cutting down trees. Trade and manufacturing in red, as I mentioned here. Red areas always indicate that there's a major city in that area. When you see red, the trade is like factories and all these companies there. You tend to have a lot of people living in those areas, and that's where you're going to be able to have that because you're going to have a concentration of people. And then, of course, the resources, the symbols in the map represent what natural resources are found there and how people are utilizing them. So as a reminder, as you are finishing answering the questions you're watching this video, always remember that these maps are going to be a big part of the class. It's, guaranteed that every unit will be working with some kind of mapping feature on this. So it's important that you understand and you get used to this idea because it is going to be a big deal. It is going to be a big part of our class and all that. So, if you have any questions, you can always email me, send me a message via Google Classroom. All right. I hope everyone has a great day, and thank you.